I recently listened to an episode of the Huberman Lab podcast titled How to Grow from Doing Hard Things. One piece of the discussion jumped out for me, and it was about research done in understanding threatening faces. These people were given 800 pictures to rate in terms of threatening and non-threatening. But after about 200 faces, the actual threatening faces were removed and they just saw faces. But the ratio of threatening faces selected stayed at the same sort of rate. People were becoming more nitpicky and looking at those faces that they would normally let slide. And in the podcast, there's a term for it, which is Prevalence Induced Concept Change. Basically, it finds that as we experience fewer problems in real life, like noisy construction, but not really, we lower our threshold for what we consider a problem. Therefore, we replace real problems with non-real problems, or ones that we would ignore because there are larger problems that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. I'm reminded of Leonard Shelby from Memento, the man with a 15-minute memory span. Spoiler warning, by the way, on a 25-year-old film.
I'm not a killer. I'm just someone who wanted to make things right.
Don't at me in the comments. But by the beginning, middle, or end of the movie, I can't remember, because the story is non-linear, he's told he's avenged his wife's murder, but he refuses to believe it and then continues hunting people he thinks killed his wife. Even with his brain functioning properly inside those 15 minutes, he continues to actively believe the murder hasn't been solved. That's a neutral reference to warm you up, because when we reflect on our real lives, there are so many things we insist are still a problem, maybe because we haven't properly contextualized things, and we have already taken a side in an issue and we insist it is what it is, whether it's endemic racism, patriarchy, Nazis, out of control crime, internet comments, or something happened out on the street like an accidental shoulder barge, and we believe that person did it deliberately. They must have done, because why else would they do it? If you understand the lyrics to Bittersweet Symphony, it's a song about not being able to change one's mindset. Kind of appropriate here. I realized that while I was making this video. Anyway, because of this research brought up in the podcast discussion, it seems that our default mindset is to always find new threats, new threatening faces, so to speak, instead of just enjoying the easier lives that we had compared to people from 100 years ago, or even people living in the third world today. Many times, I see statements such as, the 90s were amazing because we didn't have these problems, they were solved. And I personally believe they were. And younger people, or someone in an echo chamber with no frame of reference, will refuse to believe certain parts of life were better in the 90s and early aughties. And they believe that only today with direct action can it be better. As a side note that I think is related, I'm fascinated by how we project onto others and how there's enough of us that default to interpreting other people's behaviors as a negative. We don't have that introspection, we just make that assumption. But for our own self or in-group actions, we look at those with positive intentions. And while things are getting better in this world, generally speaking, I also think about criticism, actual critical feedback that is supposed to address the problem to something that's happened, of course, and offer a solution. Even that today is highlighted as a threat. Do you remember mansplaining and manspreading? That was an offense a few years ago, possibly a capital offense, I don't know, with the murder charge thrown at somebody. Because on a general level, there was not a lot to complain about men in the civilized world. And while I know that assholes do exist, they are the exception, not the majority. And I've seen things that I consider pretty simple, it's cut and dry. I understand how the man meant it or how it should be taken, but male politicians are just matter-of-factly explaining something to a committee, or they have a back and forth with a woman, and the man's opinion is considered offensive because he's explaining something.
I'm enjoying it.
You're loving what?
The mansplaining that's going on.
What do you
Or just talking me through how by not answering the question, by repeating processes which are not related to the question that I've asked.
What's mansplaining, Senator?
A man is explaining something, therefore it's it's offensive. These have become society's sort of newest threatening faces. I think there was a study, I'll have to cite it, hopefully it will come up over here, but generally, men know more about general knowledge than women do. And that's not an offensive thing to say. It just points out that we're both different as two different genders or sexes inside the human species, and we should play to those strengths. But again, we tend to focus on the negatives because those are the only real negatives that are left, and luckily, we're not actually in a World War III type situation. Now, where I live, which is Hong Kong, if you didn't know, thanks for subscribing if this is your first time seeing one of my videos. This is one of the safest places in the world. And while I don't knowingly take it for granted, I feel I do now because I understand Prevalence Induced Concept Change. Riding the MTR is the equivalent of the threatening face for me. I hate it when people are talking or watching movies on their phone loudly. People push or don't step far enough into the train to make room for others while boarding. This actually at the moment is the equivalent of a Sunday crowd because it's a bank holiday here. This is not the normal rush hour. But bottom line, people will perform in ways in how they really shouldn't because it's disrespectful. And I know with what I listed, there are worse things happening on, say, the New York trains that New York citizens would gladly swap this situation for, because look at it. It's nice and clean. It's orderly. It's just, when you get down to it, into the little details, we sometimes don't accommodate one another in terms of our personal space to a much more nuanced degree than, again, as you get in the USA, in New York or somewhere like that. But anyway, I keep mentioning New York because it's the most famous. But for me, this would be the next threatening thing in my life. People who are listening to their movies or talking loudly on the phone. But it irritates. What I am doing is contextualizing these incidents more accurately. That's what I hope anybody listening to does with their equivalent of a threatening face. And if you understand the concept, then please share one in the chat, because it'll be interesting to see how everyone else's perspectives differ with that thing that's a very small thing that has become actually much larger in their lives, because it's all relative, isn't it? And hopefully, if we can share some little stories, then we're all going to be a little bit wiser for it and therefore happier. That's it. That's all I wanted to share with you today. I do think the podcast is worth listening to, so the link is in the show notes, so definitely check it out so that you can sort of get your own perspective of the things that allow us to grow because they're difficult. And I'm not somebody who wants to avoid confrontation, but I'll certainly want to challenge things because I have a growth mindset. I want to grow. I want to have a growth mindset. I need to force it upon myself to constantly grow and not just take this stunted approach to life and just not look up and understand my situation, because hopefully or ultimately I want to feel better about myself and help those around me, which is what I'm trying to do with this channel.
Is it still out there? Yeah.
I just quit the camera, and in between takes, this old guy over here, he's got his phone on with the speaker on, listening to Chinese propaganda, and then this other guy just went, whoa, just belched, and they don't say excuse me here, they just do it without any sort of embarrassment. Why did I stop the camera?